It's March Madness and the Pick Six podcast, but we're going to be talking a whole bunch of football. Sam McKewon along with Evan Bland here in mid-March, right before a little bit of time off for the Silver Tongue. Evan, how are you doing?
Sam, doing well, man. The weather's warming up and we get a little football talk and yeah, I'm gonna go off the grid for a couple of days and I think football staff did that a few weeks ago and it's the time of year to do it. There aren't a ton of those windows and this maybe is a little bit of one.
It absolutely is. Spring football is still a couple of weeks away. We want to encourage folks to listen to the Big Six podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or you can go to the World-Herald. You can find us on YouTube. We've got lots of stuff coming up here in the next couple of weeks, but we will have NCAA tournament coverage, although not of Nebraska men's basketball. They won't be making the NCAA tournament. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. We'll mostly focus on football. Want to encourage people to look at Tom Chattel's press box. He talked yesterday about Matt Rhule's press conference, specifically the comments that Matt Rhule had about non-conference games. I encourage people to listen to that. We probably won't talk a ton about Rhule's comments related to games that aren't being played in the future, but Tom did a nice job of unpacking that. Matt Rhule talked to the media on Tuesday for about 40 minutes. It was a lively 40 minutes as usual. There were a few jokes in there. There were a few moments in there where he kind of went off like he usually does. And then we talked to three transfers. And I thought it was telling that we talked to three transfers. I thought that was very notable. That's some of the conversation that we had. Dane Key, Rocco Spindler, and Desan McCullough were the three transfers. And of course, we'll talk about that a little bit, specifically their thoughts on just Nebraska's culture up to this moment. But I think we'll start here, Evan. One of the things that I thought came out of the presser on Tuesday was just Matt Rhule's enthusiasm or seeming enthusiasm for the roster. Now he didn't necessarily say that in a rah rah kind of way, but he said it in sort of a matter of fact kind of way. He said, this is the best the roster's ever been. The guys are developed. It's obvious when you look at us physically that we're doing X, Y, and Z. He also mentioned, and this I believe, that everybody's on the same page. They don't have a bunch of knuckleheads. They don't have any guys in the doghouse. They probably certainly had that the first year when they just got there, and I think there were probably a few more last year, but doesn't seem to be anybody at this moment. Evan, I do want to ask you, when you think about what Rule said about the roster here in year three, knowing what they lost, knowing what they have to replace, knowing how they have to move a new coaching staff in and kind of gel them with everybody. Do you buy it? Do you buy that Rule thinks that this roster is way ahead of where they were in year one and year two?
Uh I'll buy some of it. Sam, I feel like there are certain spots where you feel like they're better. I think they're better at receiver. I think they could be better in the secondary than they were just because of the depth and what they have back. But I think there's parts of the team too that you look at and you say, I don't know that Nebraska is going to be better on the defensive line. I mean, how do you get better when you lose Ty Robinson and Nash
Good
Maker?
morning, Wildcat. This is
What?
in just a few minutes at 10:15 for story.
Well, what does that look like? And then I think the same thing's true for the offensive line as well, where you move on from a guy like Ben Scott and some multiple veterans and we kind of laid that out in the press conference as well. If that's a youth movement coming up with Sam Sledge and Grant Bricks and the likes, or is this going to be a situation where some of the older guys like Teddy Prohaska and Turner Corcoran come back? So I think there are parts of the team where you're just like you're gonna have to see it. Like you can't make that leap that they're going to be better in that area. Overall, I do think so. I think Matt Rhule's comment about the fact that there's not going to be a spring league to me is encouraging, actually. He said, there was a place and a time for that. That was a young team that was trying to learn to compete. Like you're just kind of trying to break through the malaise of spring and add a little extra juice. And he's like, this is a group that's more about the little stuff. We're going to work on execution and situational football. We've heard a lot of coaches say that it's going to be third down, pretty heavy, I think. So I think just it's an older team. It's a team that knows what's expected of it. It has a sense of urgency. And I think too, like you can't discount the fact that this is a tryout for a lot of people. This is, Nebraska's gonna have to cut 20 some players to get down to the 105 by the fall, and they're still well above that. So I just think the sense of urgency is there, the mental side is there. But no, I don't think you can say universally this is a better team just based on what they lost.
I agree with you. Yeah, the spring league last year, I would describe last spring as very full of social media stuff. And so last year, obviously, you had the Nebraska Spring League and they had the video updates for that. And obviously, they spent a lot of time on the Matt drills and sort of hitting some of the social media stuff of that. And of course, they had the Chasing Three documentary, which is sort of a hard knock style thing. I don't know if they're going to do that again this year. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. I thought, again, all those things are great. I think they're good for branding. I think they're good for selling the program and all those things. But there does come a point where what you really hope to do is you really hope to win football games. And winning football games isn't necessarily about putting as much stuff on social media as possible. I do think that that spring league was designed for a roster of 150. It's not 150 players anymore. It's going to get down to 105, and maybe that thing was a little convoluted last year, to be perfectly honest with you. I didn't quite understand it. I kind of understood it, but I also didn't. It struck me as like a really complex, fantasy football league, even though they were playing with pads. I know, but it seemed like it had a lot of moving parts. And you know me, Evan, I'm not necessarily a person who loves a lot of moving parts. I think that the more that you can reduce the moving parts and the question marks and the things that drag you down, the better the program is. I do feel like there is a streamlined sense to Matt Rhule a little bit as it relates to the football program. I too, though, wonder about the roster. I think the receiver group might be better. I think that's possible for sure. I think the secondary will be better. And I think some of that's related to health, and I think some of it's related to everybody being on the same page. And yes, some of these young guys sort of moving into more expanded roles, whether that's Donovan Jones or Mario Buford or a few other guys that have been there. But I think the competition will help clarify things and will leave the best guys getting on the field. But I also feel like part of what he's trying to do is speak it into existence. He needs this team to be really, really urgent from the jump. And let's remember, they don't have the carrot of Colorado to prod them, right? I think we would both agree that the best football game that Nebraska played last year, the best game, was Colorado. They put everything together in that game. And I thought they played pretty well against UTEP too in preparation for Colorado. Then they played Colorado, they beat Colorado, and I just never felt like Nebraska quite had the same edge the rest of the season. Their second best game of the year, in my opinion, was at Ohio State. And then their third best game was against Wisconsin. And remember, the external motivation with Wisconsin was a bowl bid, and also we hadn't beaten that team. Nebraska hadn't beaten that team in 12 years or whatever it was, hadn't beaten them in a really long time. And so there were external motivations that I felt like made Nebraska a better football team, and they're not going to have that when they play Cincinnati. They're not. They're going to go down to Arrowhead. That's going to be fun, but they don't have any hate in their heart for Cincy. And since he's not a big name and there's no revenge to get, and so he needs this team to be very internally strong. Somebody that goes down to Arrowhead and says, you know what, we're going to win this game 31-14. We don't give a crap. We're the better football team, and we're going to express that on this field over the next 3 hours because we're going to hold ourselves to a higher internal standard. I still wonder if he's got that unit. I think they added a lot of transfers. Those transfers have to come in and lead, which isn't perfect. We'll get to that offensive line in a second. But I thought that the most notable comment. Now, see, other people will go in different directions. I don't find the non-conference stuff that notable because again, that stuff is in the past. Like, and it's about games that won't even happen. He went off on that. I get it. When the day comes when they need a college football commissioner, I may nominate Matt Rhule for that role. Um, and then those things are interesting and important and dynamic, and we'll write about them. But I thought the most interesting comments were about Dylan Raiola.